Welcome everyone to Julia Child's birthday celebration with the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience. I'm Todd Schulkin. I'm the Executive Director of the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts. For those who might not have been to a Santa Barbara Culinary Experience event before, the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience is a program designed to shine a spotlight on the gastronomic and culinary and hospitality industry in Santa Barbara and all the riches that Julia herself discovered when she lives here. And it was started before the pandemic, but certainly with the pandemic, the goal has been to help revitalize the industry as the restaurant and wine and hospitality industries recover. So we're really glad you could join us, because by participating today, you are supporting that. We are here in Santa Barbara, which is the foundation's headquarters as well, and it is great to be here live from Santa Barbara. All right. So the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience is brought to you by our sponsors. So we send our thanks to Appeal and also to Cambria and brewer Clifton Wines for helping make today and the SBC possible. And part of our efforts at the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience to help support the local community, today's event has a nonprofit partner. It is the Community Health Centers of the Central Coast. And we think it was very fitting to partner with the Community Health Centers of the Central Coast because they've played a vital role for many, many years in supporting local farm workers, particularly their healthcare needs. And certainly the pandemic, I hope, revealed to everyone watching how important farm workers are as essential workers, and the community health centers were instrumental in helping them get information, testing, and healthcare to support them during COVID-19, which is still ongoing, but particularly at the beginning. And certainly that helped all of us continue to be eat and fed during the pandemic, thanks to the work of farm workers who continued going. So we really hope you will, if you haven't already donated to Community Health Centers of the Central Coast, that you would choose to do so. There's a QR code we'll post that you can do it right from where you are at home. And we have some other exciting information of giveaways that we have going. So everyone who's attending now has the chance to win a free wine tour from Coastal Concierge in Santa Barbara, which is a pretty exciting thing. If you haven't been able to go wine tasting before in Santa Barbara area, it's a terrific treat, and with world-class wine. And we have one other special giveaway. So if you don't yet have a copy of the new compendium of Julia Child's quotes, People Who Love to Eat Are Always the Best People, that came out in November, we are giving away 5 copies, and all you have to do is be following the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience on Instagram. It's at SB Culinary Experience, and we will pick a lucky 5 winners to get their own copy. All right, without further ado, I have the lovely Julie Cohen with me right here live from Santa Barbara. And then I have the lovely Betsy West, who is in New York. Hi, Betsy.
Hi, everybody.
And then I have Alex Prud'homme, who is live from the Child Compound in rural Maine. And so Julie and Betsy have a long and esteemed career as journalists and filmmakers, but are perhaps best known as the Oscar-nominated directors and producers of the acclaimed RBG. And Alex is Julia's grandnephew. He's also a trustee of the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts. For those who don't know, Julia was insistent on that really long name, so that's why we say the whole thing all the time. And Alex is an author in his own right, so he, among other things, co-authored Julia's beautiful memoir, My Life in France, and he has a couple books coming out, one called Born Hungry, which is an illustrated biography for children about Julia Child, and his next book for grown-ups and everybody else is about presidential food, and is starting with George Washington, going right up to the present, and both those books come out next year in 2022. If you want to learn more about any of our special guests, there's biographic information on sbc.events. Just go to the event page. All right, so Julie and Betsy join us to primarily share a preview of their new documentary about Julia's life and legacy. And they're going to talk to us a little bit about what they learned in the process of going deep into Julia lore. And they're going to share some fun behind-the-scene moments. And they even brought a sneak preview clip. And Alex, you won't see in the clip, but you'll see when you go watch the movie that he's featured in the movie. And he's here, and he's going to add kind of some personal perspective to, I guess, the objective view that Julie and Betsy took. So I think so. Julie's with me here in Santa Barbara. We'll start with Julie, and then we'll get Betsy to weigh in, and then get Alex to weigh in. And so the obvious question is, after RBG, why Julia?
Yes, in a way, the answer to why Julia is not only why not, like how not Julia. I mean, I think I have to correct your claim of objectivity, because like, how can you be objective about Julia Child, this towering in so many ways figure who just really changed the way Americans think and thought about food, about television, and even kind of about the role of women in our society, and like what makes an amazing woman. What's a woman that who's a woman who grabs people's attention? Obviously, Julia Child and Ruth Bader Ginsburg come from very separate spheres, but yet both people who really changed the world, and changed the world for American women.
Okay, I'm going to go to Betsy then, see if I can get a more cutting answer. So when you went from RBD to Julia, was it kind of an idea of like, we want to do something totally opposite, or do you see like a kind of connective tissue?
Well, I mean, you could say that they were opposite in that RBG notoriously hated to cook. And RBG's husband, Marty, though, was a Julia Child influenced chef. But when you dig down, they do have similarities. I mean, these are both women who found their passion and pursued it, would not take no for an answer, even when people were repeatedly trying to discourage them from doing what they knew they had a talent to do. They both had celebrity later in life. I was really drawn to the fact that Julia, didn't have her success until she was in her 50s, which is pretty inspiring to a lot of people. And, they also both had great love stories. So when Julie, Cohen, and I were casting about for ideas, and people were suggesting things to us, when Julia Child's name came up, we were like, wow, yeah, there is a person who really has had a profound impact on our world, and we want to know more.
Well, and I think people might say, oh, well, there's been loads done on Julia, but actually this is the first definitive documentary about her, right?
I think the first theatrical length documentary. We also are really proud of how much of the film is in Julia's own voice, not only on television, but a number of audio interviews, and not just clips from the French chef, but also really Julia describing her own life and influences and reaction to the many, many tastes that influenced her life and work.
Alex, did you want to say anything about, from your perspective, when you learned that Julie and Betsy were turning their lens to Julia? What was your reaction?
I was thrilled, of course. As a fan of the RBG movie, I thought they did a really wonderful, subtle job of bringing this icon to life and making her seem very human and very relatable, even though she had done so many amazing things. And having spent a lot of time with Julia Child and working on her memoir with her, I was thrilled to see that these two were picking Julia as their next topic. And obviously, I think it's a very worthy one, and I think people are going to be surprised. They think they know her story, but I think there are elements to this film that will surprise people.
And I think you have a very good background, so I think maybe could you just give us a quick 2 cents about where you are and why that's a special place in Julia history?
I am on Mount Desert Island, Maine, which is where Acadia National Park is. And my grandparents built a house here back in the 30s and 40s. And Paul and Julia actually helped them build the house by hand. And Julia cooked in the kitchen here. I grew up spending time with them in the summers here. I learned to make fish chowder and blueberry pie with Julia. My sisters made lace cookies. My cousins helped her cook lobster. And so there's a lot of history in this house, in these walls around me. And so it's very appropriate that I'm here today.
And great that there's magical internet access there that was not there. And just remind people, because we all know, but who are your grandparents?
My grandparents were Charles and Frederica Child, and Charles Child was the twin brother of Paul Child. Paul was Julia's husband. He was 10 years older and quite different from Julia, but we can get into that later.
But they looked exactly alike, and you look a lot like your grandfather.
And I look a lot like Paul and Charlie, yes.
Because of that,
I'm a chip
I think
off
that
the
twin
old
thing
Child
is
block.
it's such a neat factoid that I didn't want to leave that out. Now, so I was curious, did you go into the movie thinking, oh, where we want to explore the Julia and Paul relationship, or was that really something that just emerged out of the process of researching the documentary?
I think we went in wanting the love story to be part of our story. As Betsy said, we both love stories. Like who doesn't? And just because something is a documentary doesn't mean it can't also have some romantic comedy elements. And we certainly think this film has that. So, I think we also wanted to explore the connection of Julia's passion for food and her passion for the love of her life. Like, you can't really separate out people's professional life from their life, and that was particularly true of Julia and Paul, and I think that scene kind of shows how her love and passion fueled her cooking and baking, and how the baking played a role in their romantic life together, and wanting to combine biography and food was part of the fun of making this film.
And Betsy, did you have some discoveries that you thought were interesting or not what you expected when you were exploring with various people who knew their relationship?
Absolutely. I mean, we knew it was a great love story and an unusual love story. As Alex said, Paul was 10 years older than Julia and really opened up Julia's eyes to the world. When they met in the Far East in World War II, he was a very sophisticated, well-read man of the world, and they went together to Paris, and Julia discovered food, but it was Paul who opened her up. I think some of the things we discovered, though, were Paul was an amazing photographer. I mean, I guess you know that, Todd, and Alex too, but I'm not sure the world knows that so many of these fantastic, evocative photos of Julia just in ecstasy in France are Paul's. They're just so beautiful. And also to have the diaries, access to the diaries that are in Julia's archive and other places with, letters to her friends, to her sister, Paul's letters to Alex's grandfather, describing what they were going through, I think was a revelation for us and showed the evolution of their relationship.
And Alex, I wanted to see from your perspective, I can't remember how old you were when, to experience being Paul and Julia together. Did you have much experience, and do you have any memories of what that was like, or how they were like as a special couple?
Well, I was born in 1961, which is the year that Paul and Julia quit the Foreign Service and returned to America. And Julia's first cookbook, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, was published. And so, in a sense, I grew up with them. Paul and Julia never had children of their own, but they were sort of surrogate grandchildren, grandparents to my sisters and my cousins and me. We would spend Thanksgivings, holidays, summers here in Maine. We would visit them in France or later in California. So we were very lucky to have that. And sitting around the table, we would hear their wonderful stories about what Julia called the favorite years of her life when they went to France. And as Betsy was just saying, you know, they were really a complementary couple. I kind of think of their love story along the lines of Pygmalion or My Fair Lady, where Paul, like Henry Higgins, is a sophisticated older man. He was a diplomat. He had lived in Paris in the 30s. He knew food and wine. And Julia was younger, less sophisticated California girl, a real ingenue. And he tutored her essentially in culture and politics and history. And she just loved it. She ate it up. She was very smart and very inquisitive. And but what makes their story so fascinating to me is about halfway through their marriage, in fact, right around 1961, they reversed roles, where Paul had been the senior member of the relationship and the public face of the relationship as a diplomat. Once they moved back to the States, Julia became a celebrity. And they very intentionally both kind of moved her forward, and Paul slipped back behind the scenes where he played a crucial role. And so when Julia and I were writing her memoir together, she dedicated the book to Paul, saying, you know, without Paul Child, I would not have had my relationship. And they referred to each other as two sides of a coin. And I think that was really accurate.
And in their presence, did you feel that special bond that they had?
Oh, very much. I mean, they would complete each other's sentences. They had a kind of shorthand language that they would use. Julia was very close to my grandmother. Paul was obviously very close to Charlie, his twin. So you couldn't help but be swept up into their excitement about the world. And if you ate dinner at their house, Julia would be putting everybody to work. She would say, now you wash the lettuce and you dice the butter and you go help Paul bring the wine up from the cellar. And we would all be running around and we'd be having a great time. We would all cook together, eat together, and then we'd all do the dishes together, which is probably not the case in most households, but it was really fun. So I knew Julia growing up both as a celebrity, because I used to watch her on television and my parents' little black and white TV, and as a member of the family. And so it was just, I learned a lot from both of them by osmosis.
Julia, I saw you sort of nodding along. Did you want to add from now where you sit to what Alex was saying?
Yeah, I mean, as Alex described the relationship, and I think part of the reason that Betsy and I were so drawn to the love story is this isn't just like a typical romance of its era. This is a feminist love story. As Alex says, as Julia's star was on the rise and it became clear that, you know, his Audrey Hepburn is now flowering into a really important figure in America. Like, he could have been threatened by that. He could have felt competitive with that. But Paul Child was just the opposite. He kind of threw himself in. We actually include a quote, a soundbite of Alex saying in the film that, like, if Julia was the boxer, then Paul was the corner man. Like, he was kind of coaching in some cases, advocating for his interests. There are photos of him which are in the film where he's on the set of The French Chef, you know, ducked down behind the scenes, like handing a utensil or, you know, ready to wipe up a spoon that's full of, like, you know, batter on the side. And that's unusual by today's standards, but in the 1960s, it was rare. Can't say unheard of, because Marty Ginsburg was the same. And like, I think Betsy and I felt like, wow, we're starting to sense a theme here for women to, reach their heights. Often there's a great man who's helping with support.
Yeah. Well, we're going to come back to that feminist debate on Julia, but before we get too far away from folks having watched the clip, I think the clip really clearly shows in the movie that there's quite a tantalizing depiction of food. And so I wanted to ask, did you and Betsy approach this as food being a character in the movie?
Absolutely. Food is second to Julia. I'd say food is really the main character of this story. Certainly one of the stars of this film. We were quite careful to make sure that we are presenting every recipe that you see, every food item that you're watching being prepared in our film is an actual Julia Child recipe. You can look up that pear tart if you thought it looked delicious and try baking it yourself this afternoon. We've got pear tart, boeuf bourguignon, salad niçoise, asparagus with hollandaise, roast chicken. Not thinking if I'm leading. And a roast beef, and a simple roast beef and potatoes dish, all prepared in the film. And Susan Spungen, a great cook and food stylist, not only prepares the food, which is beautifully shot, as we can describe a bit later, but she prepared, and she also kind of plays Julia. That was her rolling out the pie dough in that clip.
And Betsy, did you want to weigh in on that and maybe talk about, because I think we talked about before a little bit also the kind of technical requirements of trying to decide to put film photography and all of what Julia is just describing into a documentary?
Yeah, we wanted to film food in a way that it hadn't really been filmed before, very sumptuously. And early on in the process, we were talking to our graphic designer, who told us about a cameraman in Paris, Nanda Bredillard, who specializes in food photography and very close-up macro shooting, so that you, at the beginning, you don't really know what you're looking at, but it's just so beautiful. And so we combined his photography with our wonderful Claudia Raschke cinematographer, who was doing the shooting with Susan Spungen in a kitchen, which we constructed in Manhattan, in a studio in Manhattan last summer. Our producer Holly Siegel had the specs for Julia's Cambridge kitchen and designed basically two sides of the kitchen and sourced an oven from the 1950s, and also copper pots, exactly the way Paul had set out the copper pots in Julia's kitchen. So we shot for 5 days with Susan, with Claudia in New York, and then sometimes we were matching that with shots that we had done in Paris with Nanda, because we had planned to have Nanda come to New York, but the pandemic intervened, so we did these two events separately and then married it all together.
And why did you feel like, because I think you said that if people see the documentary, they may not see a full replica of Julia's kitchen in it, but what led you to feel like we need to do that rather than just, have it kind of similar with a copper pot?
We wanted that authenticity. We wanted the feeling of Julia's kitchen. And no, we're not giving you a tour necessarily, but you see it in the backdrop. And I think it really added to the atmosphere of trying to really create these dishes exactly as Julia would have.
Well, maybe that leads into my next question, which is, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning in the why, but I think I would dig a bit deeper. Were there some surprises of things that you hadn't expected to find that you did, or a direction that you planned to go on that you changed, Julie?
I think the direction that unfolded as we were making the film was France. How, anyone who studied Julia knows how formative the experience of living in France and discovering not only French food but French culture, how big an influence that played on her. And I think we found when we did a week shoot that was in Paris and also in Provence, and where Julia and Paul had a lovely home that you'll see in the film. And I feel like when we started to interview some of our French characters, including the woman that was just in that clip, Danielle Delpuche, who was a close friend of Julia's and served for a time as the personal chef to French President Francois Mitterrand, and was the first woman to take that role as a chef for a head of state in France. There was something that the French characters brought to the story that felt very essential to the Julia Child story. So I think the thing that developed as the filmmaking and editing process went forward is like, more France, more French commentary. Like, it just felt like it brought a mood and a tone that really was compatible with Julia's story.
And you felt you and Betsy could make the sacrifice of extra time in France.
Yeah,
it's almost...
It was a hardship.
Yeah, well, I mean, watching the footage now in the COVID world, I feel like when Betsy and I watched this, the full film watch down that you do in post-production to make sure every color is right and every technical moment is perfect, we almost left after the first act. We were like, we just want to get on a plane and go to Paris.
So Betsy, maybe on that note, ask you a little bit about, because I struggle a bit in talking about Julia's story and legacy. Is it a French story, and is it about Julia bringing France to America? Because I feel like it's also very an American story, and other than the people Julia specifically knew in France, she's actually not very well known, almost unknown by the French public. So just picking up on what Julie said, what's your kind of reflection on the sort of French versus American story behind Julia?
Yeah, well, it is an American story, and I was surprised to learn that in France, not as many people know about Julia Child, but certainly here, everybody knows who Julia is. And in some ways, that was the challenge for us, to go a little bit deeper. Part of that was to put Julia in a context. I mean, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I grew up in the world of, tuna fish casserole, mushroom soup, tuna fish casserole, and Jell-O salad, and, boring, pedantic public television, and we wanted to set the stage for Julia coming on board. I mean, I actually grew up in New England, so I remember Julia on Channel 2, and the way people reacted to her, the unexpected impact that she had, we wanted to really acknowledge that and to show that. So we spent quite a bit of time dissecting the show and how the show was put together, but also putting it in the larger context. I think we also wanted to, everybody loves Julia. Her personality just comes through, as it did from the very first time that she made an omelet on a very dry public television show, and the phones were just ringing off the hook. Who is that woman? We want more of her. People love her personality. We also wanted to get into her character and really what gave her the grit to keep going, and her spirit. So we explore some of her, as she became a celebrity, she was not afraid to speak up for the things that she believed in. She was a supporter of Planned Parenthood at a time when that sometimes brought protests to her. And she also was someone who later in life evolved. She was a flexible person. She learned. And certainly, we tell the story of how she changed her views about homosexuality when her own lawyer became ill with AIDS, and she had a real turn. So we wanted to get deeper into who was Julia.
And Alex, listening to what Julia and Betsy said, and obviously you were there as a family member, as Julia maybe became more flexible in her views. And just to remind people, Julia was born in 1912, so and then lived a very long life. She was almost 92 when she died. So Alex, did you want to weigh in on that?
I think Betsy put it just right. Julia, one of the defining characteristics of Julia was her inquisitiveness. She was such an enthusiast, and she was always asking questions and wanted to know more. And as her marriage demonstrated, she was very open to being taught, and she was herself an excellent teacher, but she called herself an eternal pupil. And I think what she meant by that is that she felt that you never really stop learning. In fact, I was with her 2 days before her death, and we were sitting in her garden, and she said, I want to go to a Chicago slaughterhouse, and I want to go lobster fishing, and I want to teach children how to make chocolate cake. And so for her, the road kept stretching forward, fast forward at all times. And part of that was her adaptability and her willingness to change. People don't know often that the French chef was just a small part of her entire career. It lasted about a decade. And then she changed course, and she stopped performing as the French chef, and she started to perform as Julia Child, and used recipes from around the world, not just from France, kind of re-Americanized herself, started to write her books in the first person, and really evolved. And it wasn't always easy. There was a period when she felt that public television wasn't serving her right, and so she left and went to Good Morning America, which was really difficult because the PBS shows were a half an hour long, whereas the commercial television, she had a 3-minute segment, and she had to produce an entire meal in 3 minutes. So she would show beginning, middle, and end of that. And it took a while, but she learned and adapted, and in classic Julia fashion, garnered a larger audience than ever in that. And so as a member of the family and as a fan, it was such a great instruction to just spend time with her and watch her. She would hit a roadblock, and then she'd figure out a way around it, and then usually would end up doing amazing things. The other thing I'll add is she was very generous and very empathetic. And so if you went to a restaurant with her, she would always sign autographs, but we would go into the kitchen afterwards, and she would want to talk to every single person in the kitchen. And not only the chef, but she was really interested in talking to the salad person and the dishwasher and the waiters. And so a meal with Julia was never short, but it was always entertaining and instructive. And she was just a wonderful inspiration and example to all of us.
Okay, I can't have Betsy and Julie here as the RBG filmmakers without this very important question.
Yeah.
Was Julia a feminist?
So, I guess the question is whether that's something that requires someone to self-describe or not. To my knowledge, and Alex knows better than Julia certainly didn't go around describing herself as a feminist. Whether she ever might have copped to that, I don't know. But truthfully, when you look at the heart of what feminism is, allowing women to be their full selves, separate and apart from men, I gotta go with yes, Julia was a feminist. I mean, her whole life story, presenting herself as someone who knew what she was doing and could teach others, presenting someone who herself as not someone who was just an appendage to a man, but was a fully realized, accomplished, interesting, smart person, quite apart from her husband or men's view of her looks. Just to think about the way women on television are usually portrayed. I'm going with yes, she was a feminist.
Betsy,
Yeah, I
assume
would
you
say,
agree with Julie, but
Yeah, I agree. And, we interviewed Julia's colleague, sous chef Sarah Moulton, and talked about, as Alex said, Julia was such a people person, and she so generous. She would always go into the kitchen after she ate somewhere. And according to Sarah, if there were no women, she would say, "Where are the women? Where are they?" That she really was a proponent for giving women opportunities in the culinary world. So that's a pretty feminist position to take.
And Alex, I think one of the reason this is a debate is that Julia was often asked this. I don't know if you actually even have footage. And she would usually either say, well, she usually didn't say no, she would demur. And she certainly, as Julia was alluding to, did not self-identify as a feminist. Julia, do you want to comment on that first?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll say we do. You asked if we'd seen footage like that. We do have a clip in the film where she's being asked in the 1970s, like, what she thinks about the women's liberation movement, and she's definitely like pulling back a little bit. And I think the point that she wants to make at that point is how important playing the role of wife to Paul was to her. And she said, like, yes, I work hard, but I want to come home at the end of the day and cook a delicious meal for my husband and clean it up. And like, that's a beautiful thing. And so, in her mind at that time, in my view, that's kind of an incorrect stereotype of what women's liberation is. You can be a good wife and cook good meals for your husband and still be a feminist, but she just wanted to make clear that she wasn't the stereotype of what people thought of as women's libers.
And Alex,
and
did you want to weigh in? Did you ever have a conversation with Betsy, with Julia about being a feminist?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, as Julie was just outlining, Julia did not call herself a feminist. And she, as you put it, she demurred when I asked her directly about it. And her editor, Judith Jones, who was a very important figure in Julia's story, also felt the same way. The way Julia put it to me is, well, I don't like the bra burners. And I think that was her way of saying that she thought that she could be an independent, strong role model without having to resort to anger and just kind of going ahead and doing her thing. But I will say that she gave people a set of instructions for how to gain their independence. She was really empowering. And, she used her cookery for a much larger agenda, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. And so, despite what she said, I would agree that Julia was a feminist, and was a very strong role model for lots of people, but especially for women. And if you look at it in the context of the time, I think you have to say that she was a feminist by deed, if not by name.
And Betsy, you want to weigh in? Obviously, you guys are growing a body of expertise on this subject.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that they've said. I just have to say that the definition of feminism, I think, has evolved somewhat. And you think about when Julie was being asked this question, feminism was often the F word, and perhaps mischaracterized for what it was. So I think Julia eventually would have come around and said, yes, I am a feminist.
No, that's a good point about the evolution and the flexibility that she did change her views.
Yeah.
And I guess it goes back to that dialogue too that Julie brought up. Betsy, do you have to be self-described as a feminist to be a feminist, or certainly be a feminist icon?
Yeah, I don't think so. And, many women look up to Julia, I think, as a person who is empowering, is a role model, as Alex said.
Betsy, did you get into, though, this, because Julia took some flack, right, as Julie was alluding to, that she wasn't exactly the feminist role model, because she was advocating women to put on the apron and go in the kitchen and cook real food and do things that are very much associated with the domestic feminine sphere. Did you guys explore that in the film, or where did you net out kind of with criticism
Not so-
of Julia.
I'm not so much. I mean, I'm not sure that she took a lot of flack for that, and it's not something that we really do explore. We do go into her commitment to work for Planned Parenthood, to support reproductive rights, which she was very committed to, despite whatever protests there might have been, and there were some protests. But no, people saying, "Oh, that Julia Child is retrograde," we didn't really get into that, and I didn't see huge evidence. Julie?
Well,
I would
well,
just
think
add
actually
one
this
quick
maybe
thing.
leads- So,
Sorry,
Alex,
Todd.
did you want to
I'd
add
add one thing, which is in the French context, cookery is a very male bastion, and so Julia was kind of claiming that to a certain extent, and that's less true in the States. But what's important is that the lessons that she was giving people, particularly women, gave them the tools of empowerment. It was knowledge, and in a sense, it was a form of power. And when Julia suggested that people go to the supermarket and demand, better mushrooms and fresh herbs, which were not very prevalent back in the early '60s, they did. People went out, and this grocery stores had to change. And Julia wasn't the only one, but she certainly was a very loud voice, and encouraging people to travel, particularly to France, or to go to cookware stores and buy the right knives and the right kind of pans. And it's, these were tools that represented more than just ability.
Yeah, Julie, I was going to ask you, because I think one of the last things I wanted to talk about is Julia's legacy and what you guys felt defined it, or whether the film helped you kind of revise how you would have described it before making the movie. But I also think the feminist thing is also something that relates to the legacy.
Absolutely. I think this word empowerment has come up a few times. I think we all understand it's essential to what's most important about the women's movement. And again, when we were interviewing people who had watched Julia's shows, The French Chef and her later work contemporaneously, again and again, the phrase people would use unprompted was, I thought, if she can do it, I can do it. And that is what empowerment is, thinking like, this thing looks difficult and challenging, and there's like a mountain of ingredients and complex instructions, but I'm gonna take this and make it my own and build it into something delicious. In a very sort of metaphoric way, what she was doing was empowering women to create deliciousness. And amen to that.
Well, and I would say from my chair at the foundation, I've also learned that she was certainly empowering plenty of men, and maybe not when she started, but certainly when you move to the present, you can hear a lot of men say, "Oh, I never thought cooking was for me, but I love Julia." So Betsy, same question for you, maybe more broadly, but you can stick with the feminism if you like. Did making the film change your view of what Julia's legacy is, or refine it? How would you characterize it?
Yeah, I think that we take cooking shows for granted now, but you have to realize that Julia really was the first. She had such a cultural impact. I think talking to the chefs we interviewed in the film, Ina Garten and Marcus Samuelsson and Jose Andres, and getting their perspective on Julia and how she really changed the course of food and cooking, and the love of just exploring new ideas. I mean, certainly people don't necessarily cook the way Julia Child cooked. There's so many different branches and ways to cook, but she opened the door to that, and I guess I have a more profound understanding of what a seminal figure she was.
And Alex, did the discussion and just even the evolution of working with the foundation, and since Julia's death, has that also evolved your perspective of what Julia's legacy is?
Absolutely. I think we all tend to focus on Julia as cook, but I think the longer I've worked on Julia projects and thought about her, the more I'm convinced that ultimately her real legacy is slightly different, and that is in her very positive, can-do, charismatic, funny, inquisitive personality. She would say, you've got to work hard, you've got to learn your technique, try new things. If you make a mistake in the kitchen, never apologize. But above all, have fun. And that's a seemingly simple message. And it's one that she applied to cookery. But at the end of the day, it's really a life lesson that we can all apply to our lives in different ways. And again, to use that word, it's very empowering to people. She gave people confidence to go out and pursue their dreams and take risks and have fun doing it. And then I think that's the really wonderful, lasting legacy.
Well, Julie, you get the last word because you came to what is one of Julia's hometowns. Maybe we'll just remind people, because Julia is so associated with Boston and Cambridge, that Julia was actually a Californian, which I think actually speaks volumes about the history of California, because she was raised here in a similar time. So she returned here in late life, and certainly Santa Barbara is very proud to have been one of Julia's hometowns, as Boston remains as well. But a last thought on Julia's legacy.
I think Julia, with her authenticity and just being out there in public 100% as herself. I mean, to me, this becomes the Julia, the television character. Like, we have this idea in our mind that people on television, and women in particular, have to constrain themselves in all sorts of ways to present as like demure or petite or sexy or quiet, and Julia was just, came on screen and she was her. It happened very organically. No one thought like this would be a TV star. She showed up on a TV show called I've Been Reading, and all of a sudden everyone's like, wait a second, that's something, that could be something. By being her ebullient self, she sparked this whole revolution in Americans, love of food, that food didn't have to be so proper and perfect. It just had to be, you had to dig into it and have it be delicious. To me, it's just inspiring on every level, and the only things I can say as last words are bon appetit.
Well, maybe as a last word, you could also tell us the plan. When are we going to be able to go to the movies?
Absolutely. We are so excited for this film to get out there in the world, and for people to start eating up this story. We're excited to announce that we are going to be screening at the Toronto Film Festival, the Toronto International Film Festival, which will be both in person for those of you in Canada, but also we'll have a virtual component to it. And the film will be coming to a theater near you this fall. So I'm excited for everyone to enjoy it and to hear more about how people are reacting.
Well, and definitely, if you are following the Foundation on social media or the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience, we will give you breaking news about the release of the documentary as soon as we have it. So, Julie, thank you for coming to Santa Barbara and joining us. And Betsy and Alex, back east, thank you very much for joining us to celebrate Julia's birthday as well. Don't go anywhere yet. I've got a few other things to share with everybody. So there is about to be, the documentary starts what might be called a Julia Palooza of Julia's story from every facet and angle. Filming in and around Boston right now is a scripted series that explores very much what Betsy was talking about putting Julia and her rise to celebrity in the context of the time, which of course was the early 1960s all the way through the 1970s, which I feel personally had been left out of Julia's story, that a lot was going on in America then, and that will be hopefully out on HBO Max at the beginning of next year. And next week we begin filming a new cooking competition show in Los Angeles. centered on Julia's legacy and what Julia can still bring from what she taught people before. So there's a lot of exciting Julia content. Again, the quote book, which you'll see on your screen in a second, that is also a great way to, as Betsy put it, all the sage advice and wisdom that has also stood the test of time. And as Alex mentioned, that How You Live is out now. It's the first official compendium of Julia quotes. And like we said, 5 lucky people will get a free copy. All you have to do is be following the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience at SB Culinary Experience. And to win a copy of the book, the winners will be chosen at random at the end of the day on Monday. So you have until Monday to make sure you're following, and we'll contact them on Tuesday, August 17th. And you might want to get your mobile phone back out if you have it handy. We're going to put back up the QR code because we'd love it if you haven't already to make a donation to the community health centers of the Central Coast in honor of what would have been Julia's 109th birthday, to help support farm workers in particular and their health through, unfortunately, the continuing pandemic. We know this is something Julia would be very pleased that we were supporting, and very pleased that you would support farm workers who could not be more essential to our survival and our comfort and eating well during the pandemic. Final thank you to the presenting sponsors of the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience, Appeals, and also Cambrian Brew Clifton Wines. We're coming to you live from the Kimpton Canary in Santa Barbara, and the Santa Barbara Culinary Experience is also in partnership with Visit Santa Barbara, our friends at Food Tank, and the SBC Food Action Network. And another reminder on the other exciting giveaway, we'll choose a lucky winner from everyone who is attending the panel today for the wine tour from Coastal Concierge. We'll notify the winner via email, so watch out for an email from info@sbc.events. My final thanks to Julie and Betsy and Alex and all of you for coming together with the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts, the Santa Barbara Culinary Experiences, and joining us to celebrate Julia's birthday. If you still want more and you've not already listened to the Inside Julia's Kitchen podcast that I host on Heritage Radio Network, the Happy Birthday Julia episode that also captures a lot of different voices from the food world's writers, chefs, other influencers. It's a compendium of their best recollections of Julia's legacy and what she means to them. I think there were some really amazing moments this year. Please check it out and raise a glass to Julia when you have lunch or dinner today. Thank you very much. Happy birthday, Julia. Cheers.
Happy birthday.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.